So moving right along, I'm truly delighted to welcome next Angus Deaton, last year's laureate in economic sciences. Angus.
Good morning. It's an enormous pleasure to be back here in Stockholm and to talk about food. I want to talk about the other end, if you like, the very poorest people in the world and what food means to them. So the simple view that I think most people have, at least most rich people have, is that malnutrition around the world is a problem of poverty and of low income, which lead to poor levels of nutrition through not having enough food. Here, indeed, is a picture of what's happening to global poverty over the last 30 years. This, in a sense, is a hockey stick too, but a reverse hockey stick, in which up until about 1990, there was really very little change, probably increase in the number of people in the world living on under $2 a day. But then since 1990, over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been one of the greatest triumphs in human history, which is a reduction of more than 1 billion people who've come out of abject destitution towards something like a tolerable, if only barely tolerable for some people, living standard. So while all these terrible things have been going on in the planet, one of the high points has been this enormous reduction in global poverty. Now, has that to the same extent shown up in human nutrition? Well, in some ways, yes, but in some ways, no. So I'm going to talk here today about adult height. Adult height is an indicator of nutritional outcomes rather than nutritional intake, which we think of as food. So I want to look a bit about the chain that goes from food intake, perhaps largely determined by income, to the outcomes in personal nutrition as measured by how tall people are. Now, adult height is likely set in early childhood, and it's set by net nutritional levels. This is a very important distinction because its intake, food is important, but so are the things that come out, the tolls on the body, particularly the amount of work children have to do, the state of sanitation in particular. And the thing about adult height is once you get to adulthood and you attain your full height, it doesn't change very much, at least before age 50. Now, that means that in a growing economy where people are getting better nourished, older people tend to be shorter than younger people because the older people had less good nutrition when they were kids than younger people do now. And so we can look at the difference in height between the elderly and the young adults as a measure of how rapidly society is progressing. Now, this picture now shows the state of heights around the world. These are women, because for one reason or another, you get much better data on women. And the bottom axis here shows a measure of national income in the year of birth. And each little blob shows a birth cohort of women. And the different colors show you different parts of the planet. The blue dots at the top right and the red dot for the US show Europe, and you can see that big arrow there, which is showing as GDP per capita has increased over the last 20, 30 years, Europeans have gotten taller, quite rapidly taller, especially in northwestern Europe, including Sweden. But if you forget about that for the time being, just look at the countries over to the left. The poorer countries in the world, there's essentially no relationship at all between income and adult height. So that for some reason, this higher income in the better, richer countries does not tend to pay off into better adult or child nutrition. So if we summarize that, These heights have increased with GDP per capita. In some countries, that's been remarkable. I mean, Korea appears to hold the record, in which women in Korea have actually grown on average, by 20 centimeters in the last 100 years. More standard around the world, at least in the richer countries, has been 1 centimeter per decade. Across poor countries, they're uncorrelated. I've talked about that already, but there's huge variability, especially in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. One thing you should note in this picture, if I can go back, is I'm going to come back to this. The very bottom left brown blob there is South Asia, India, and Pakistan, and I want to say a few words in that. The other thing that's very clear, sorry, it's a mistake if you try to skip too far. If we come to India a little bit, which I want to talk a little bit more, Indian women and men are among the very shortest in the world. There in India, there's probably been thousands of years of inadequate nutrition. The population pressure shrinks per capita food supply and shrinks people to enable them to survive. If everybody in India were taller, you couldn't maintain the size of population that's really there. But Africans, who are actually much smaller than Indians, much poorer than Indians, are actually quite a lot taller. Now, let me talk about India. It's one of the most rapidly growing countries in terms of GDP per capita and in terms of how much people are spending. Yet adult heights have been growing at only half the standard rates and much more slowly among women than men, about 1/3 of the male rate. In fact, something like half of all Indian children are severely malnourished. A lot of this is to do with discrimination against women in food and indeed in other things. This keeps down both male and female height and growth. Everyone, including men, has to have a mom. If you then look at this picture, this is a plot of heights by age. And what it's showing here is that in India on the top, the difference between the old and the young is much less than in neighboring countries of Bangladesh and Nepal, again, to do with discrimination. If you look at this, this is for men and women in India, and you can see the men rate, which is very low by international comparisons, is actually very much higher than women. So the women's growth rate, women get less well-fed in India than men. The last point I want to make is about rapid rates of economic growth. And in spite of this fact, per capita calorie and protein consumption in India have actually been falling for the last 25 years, except for a very recent reversal. Now, what is going on here seems to be that as people get richer, not only do they want more food, but that's offset by reductions in heavy manual labor. There's better roads, better water supply, more mechanization, and less disease. Heavy work is undesirable, so that as people get richer, they do less of it, and that reduces their calorie intake, which is offsetting the demand for food from them actually getting richer. So if I can summarize my takeaway here, is that food intake is only one of many factors setting human nutrition. That patterns of consumption are very important too, including variety of what you eat. Work is incredibly important, especially in poor countries where work patterns are much higher, much more demanding than they are here. And so is public health, including clean water and sanitation. So in a broader sense, it's not just growth in the market which determines how well nourished people are, but collective action too. Thank you very much.